Good morning. Welcome to Sunday Story Time, the online program where I read children's stories to adults who act like children on social media. And most of the time, not in a good way. Nope. Cheers. Okay, so most of us are aware that we've been reading the trophy chapter book Flat Stanley by Jeff Brown, illustrated by Steve Bjorkman. Today we will be reading chapter 5, which is the final chapter in this story, and it is called Arthur's Good Idea. But before I read the final chapter, I'm going to do a quick recap for those of you who haven't been keeping up so good. And when I say a quick recap, I mean quick, because last week we found out that a lot of people just will not watch a 17-plus minute video on Sunday Story Time. It's good to learn. So anyway, recap starting now. In chapter 1, we found out that the main family in the book Flat Stanley, their last name is Lambchop. We also found out that Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop are rather particular how their children are allowed to behave in the house, because when their youngest son Arthur came screaming into the kitchen saying, hey, come look, their first impulse was, hey, you use your indoor voice. And then they said, hay is for horses. So we know what kind of sense of humor these people have right now, don't we? Okay, then we found out that Mr. Lambchop thinks a bulletin board is a really super neato idea to get a kid for Christmas. A bulletin board, because the bulletin board in question fell off the wall in the middle of the night and squished their oldest son, Stanley, squished him flat. So when they found out that he was indeed squished flat, they decided they better take him to the doctor, but not until they had a really good breakfast, because flat boys gotta eat. So they went to the doctor said he's flat. There we go, chapter 1. Chapter 2, we found out that Stanley's the kind of boy that keeps an extra pair of extra shoestring in his pocket, which came in handy because his mom, Mrs. Lambchop, dropped a ring down a sewer drain, and so to get it, they had to tie the shoestring to his belt buckle or belt loop and then lower him down into the sewer and then swoosh him around a little bit so he could find it. And while they were doing that, the cops came and was looking at Mrs. Lambchop, wondering what she was doing. We found out Mrs. Lambchop's got herself a little bit of feistiness to her, because they called her a cuckoo, and she didn't like that. She went off on them. I like her. Anyway, so then also in chapter 2, we found out that the Lambchops are skinflints, because when they found out their son wanted to go to California to visit a friend, instead of just putting him on a train or a bus, they put him into an envelope. They stuffed their flat son into an envelope and mailed him to California because they could. Okay? And then on the return trip, the people that he went to visit made their own envelope and mailed him back. All right, that was chapter 2. In chapter 3, called Stanley the Kite, we found out that Stanley's a bit of a show-off. He's nice to his brother to a point, but when they went to a park, him and Arthur went to a park, all the rest of the kids were flying kites. Arthur wanted to fly a kite, but didn't have a kite, but he had a flat brother who said, tie a string on me and I'll be a kite. Well, they did that, and Stanley went up into the sky and just started showboating, was doing everything all by himself. Arthur wasn't doing crap, so he got bored, Arthur did. And when some boys came and asked him, hey, you want to go play and get something to eat? They went and got something to eat. And then Stanley, all showboating and stuff, got blown into a tree and got stuck, and then they had to get him out, and then Stanley was just kind of a little snotty to Arthur for the rest of the day. In chapter 4, Stanley got to be kind of a hero when they caught some art thieves, when the art museum director dressed Stanley up like a shepherd girl and nailed him to the wall in a frame, and then they caught the thieves. Now that brings us to chapter 5, the final chapter in the book Flat Stanley. Here we go. Arthur's Good Idea. For a while, Stanley Lambchop was a famous name. Everywhere that Stanley went, people stared and pointed at him. He could hear them whisper, over there, Agnes, over there. That must be Stanley Lambchop, the one who caught the sneak thieves, and things like that. But after a few weeks, the whispering and staring stopped. People had other things to think about. Stanley did not mind. Being famous had been fun, but enough was enough. And then came a further change, and it was not a pleasant one. People began to laugh and make fun of him as he passed by. "Hello, super skinny!" They would shout even ruder things about the way he looked. Stanley told his parents how he felt. "It's the other kids I mostly mind," he said. "They don't like me anymore because I'm different. Flat." See, now we can see a picture of jerk kids making fun of Stanley, who's flat. "Shame on them," Mrs. Lambchop said. "It's wrong to dislike people for their shapes, or their religion for that matter, or the color of their skin." "I know," Stanley said, "only maybe it's impossible for everybody to like everybody." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Lambchop, "but they can try." Later that night, Arthur Lambchop was woken by the sound of crying. In the darkness, he crept across the room and knelt by Stanley's bed. "Are you okay?" he said. "Go away," Stanley said. "Don't be mad at me," Arthur said. "You're still mad because I let you get tangled the day you were my kite, I guess." "Skip it, will you?" Stanley said. "I'm not mad. Go away." "Let's be friends." Arthur couldn't help crying a little too. "Oh, Stanley," he said, "please tell me what's wrong." Stanley waited a long time before he spoke. "The thing is," he said, "I'm just not happy anymore. I'm tired of being flat. I want to be regular shape again, like other people. But I'll have to go on being flat forever. It makes me sick." "Oh, Stanley," Arthur said. He dried his tears on a corner of Stanley's sheet and could think of nothing more to say. "Don't talk about what I just said," Stanley told him. "I don't want the folks to worry. That would only make it worse." "You're brave," Arthur said. "You really are." There's a picture of Arthur and Stanley in the bed there. Really are. He took hold of Stanley's hand. The two brothers sat together in the darkness, being friends. They were both still sad, but each one felt a little better than he had before. And then, suddenly, though he was not even trying to think, Arthur had an idea. He jumped up and turned on the light and ran to the big storage box where toys and things were kept and began rummaging in the box. Stanley sat up in bed to watch. Arthur flung aside a football and some lead soldiers and airplane models and lots of wooden blocks, and then he said, "Aha!" He had found what he wanted, an old bicycle pump. He held it up, and Stanley and he looked at each other and had the idea that I think most of us had from the beginning of this frickin' book, right? "Okay," Stanley said at last, "but take it easy." He put the end of the long pump hose in his mouth and clamped his lips tightly about it so no air could escape. "I'll go slowly," Arthur said. "If it hurts or anything, wiggle your hand at me." He began to pump. At first, nothing happened except that Stanley's cheeks bulged a bit. Arthur watched his hand, but there was no wiggle signal, so he pumped on. Then suddenly, Stanley's top half began to swell. "It's working! It's working!" shouted Arthur, pumping away. There's the picture of the pumping. Stanley spread his arms so that the air could get around inside him more easily. He got bigger and bigger. The buttons of his pajama top burst off. Pop, pop, pop. A moment more, and he was all rounded out. Head and body, arms and legs, but not his right foot. That foot stayed flat. Arthur stopped pumping. "It's like trying to do the very last bit of those long balloons," he said. "Maybe a shake would help." Stanley shook his right foot twice, and with a little whooshing sound, it swelled out to match the left one. There stood Stanley Lambchop as he used to be, as if he had never been flat at all. "Thank you, Arthur," Stanley said. "Thank you very much." The brothers were shaking hands when Mr. Lambchop strode into the room with Mrs. Lambchop right behind him. "We heard you," said Mr. Lambchop. "Up and talking when you ought to be asleep, huh? Shame on you." "George," said Mrs. Lambchop, "Stanley's round again." "Well, you're right," said Mr. Lambchop, noticing. "Good for you, Stanley." "I'm the one who did it," Arthur said. "I blew him up." Everyone was terribly excited and happy, of course. Mrs. Lambchop made hot chocolate to celebrate the occasion, and several toasts were drunk to Arthur for his cleverness. There's a picture of them all being happy. When the little party was over, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop tucked the boys back into their beds and kissed them, and then they turned out the light. "Good night," they said. It had been a long and tiring day. Very soon, all the Lambchops were asleep. There's a picture of them drinking hot chocolate. There's a picture of the author. And that is how Chapter 5 and subsequently the book ends. Thank you for joining us today on Sunday Story Time. I'm in the hunt for a new story to tell you. And hopefully by next Sunday we will have one. So, until then, be kind to everyone. Be nice. Make the world a better place. Peace, love, understanding. Cheers.